Raekwon wanted to call the album, instead of Only Built for Cuban Links, he wanted to call it
Wu-Gambinos.
But then a phone call came in from the actual Gambinos.
I remember him coming back to me and saying, yo, it's not happening. I'm like, what you talking about? What do you mean it can't happen? Gambino men, what? He was like, it's not gonna happen.
Gambinos. No crime family in America has been as powerful, as wealthy, or as treacherous. Founder, Carlo Gambino, had the intelligence of a fox, the strength of a lion, and the nose of a hawk.
This guy was calling the shots, and those shots ended in murder.
Hip-hop history is packed with crazy stories, but not many come close to the time when the Wu-Tang Clan found themselves on the radar of one of the most feared crime families in America, the Gambinos. We're talking about a real-deal Mafia family, and even the Wu-Tang Clan recognized a higher power that day, and had no choice but to respect it.
But you know, back then our mentality was, we'll take the risk. But you know, like I said, being young, and we had to second guess that motion and be like, you know what? Don't do it.
Let's get into it. So it's the mid-90s, and Wu-Tang Clan is taking over the game. Their rise was like smoke drifting out of Shaolin, steady, unstoppable, and catching attention everywhere. Raekwon, one of the sharpest lyricists in the group, was gearing up for his first solo album. And from the jump, he had a vision. The original title he wanted, Wu-Gambinos.
And I guess when you were coming together, doing the Cuban Links project, originally, the project was supposed to be called Wu-Gambinos.
It fit perfectly. Wu-Tang's whole vibe at that time was soaked in that cinematic Mafia energy. They were creating worlds that felt like Scarface, Goodfellas, Casino, and Once Upon a Time in America all rolled into one. So for Ray, stamping Wu-Gambinos on the album felt like the ultimate statement. They were about to take that mafioso aesthetic and make it official in name. But here's where it gets tricky. While the Wu were busy crafting their Mafia-inspired masterpiece, the real Gambino family, the infamous New York crime syndicate, one of the 5 families, was still very much active. And let's just say they weren't in the business of handing out naming rights to rappers. Using their name on an album cover wasn't just risky, it could have been straight-up dangerous. That's when Steve Rifkind, the boss over at Loud Records, Wu-Tang's label, got the call. Steve's dad was a respected music industry veteran who had connections on both sides, legit and otherwise. He passed the word along. Tell them not to do it.
Raekwon wanted to call the album, instead of Only Built for Cuban Links, he wanted to call it
Wu-Gambinos.
But then a phone call came in from the actual Gambinos.
My father called me. Somebody called him and said that they heard that, and they didn't want the name.
This wasn't about legal battles or bad press. This was a real-world warning. You don't throw a mob family's name on your album in New York City and think nobody's going to say something. The Gambinos weren't going to sit back and let someone sell records off their name. Raekwon wasn't feeling it at first. He wasn't trying to back down. In interviews, he's admitted that at the time, he was ready to take that risk.
It's like, how you just gonna use that name like that and run with it, you know what I mean? So, you know, it was something funny to me because I'm like, I'm doing it anyway.
The mindset was, we're Wu-Tang, we do what we want. But sometimes being smart means knowing when to step back. After some serious thought and probably some serious conversations, they decided it wasn't worth it. That's when the title switched to what we now know as Only Built for Cuban Links, one of the most legendary albums in hip-hop history. The vibe stayed mafioso to the core, but without the direct tie to the real-life Gambinos. And just because they changed the album title didn't mean they abandoned the theme. They still dropped the track Wu-Gambinos on the album. And that's where members took on those now iconic aliases. Raekwon as Lex Diamonds, Ghostface Killah as Tony Starks, RZA as Bobby Steels, and so on. It was a smart way to keep paying homage to that underworld style without stepping on toes that could get you hurt. Raekwon later reflected on the decision, keeping it real. Back then, our mentality was to take the risk, F it. But we had to second guess that motion and be like, you know what, don't do it. And Steve Rifkind put it plain and simple. Mafia told Raekwon not to title his album Wu-Gambinos. That's a fact.
But you know, back then our mentality was, we'll take the risk. But, you know, like I said, being young and kind of like a little immature.
It's one of those stories that sounds like rap mythology, too wild to be true. But it really happened. Wu-Tang, a group that always flirted with the legacy of the underworld, got a polite but firm reminder from the real underworld to leave certain names alone, and they listened. Now, if you don't really know how ruthless the Gambino family was, let's break it down, because Wu-Tang crossing paths with them could have turned into something deadly, real quick. These weren't just some guys playing tough. The Gambinos were involved in pretty much every kind of unhinged and violent crime you could imagine. Murder, extortion, racketeering, you name it, they were in it deep.
Gambinos. No crime family in America has been as powerful, as wealthy, or as
Even though the organization had been operating long before the name stuck, the Gambino family got its official title from Carlo Gambino, the man who ran the show from 1957 until he died in 1976. And trust, Carlo was as cold-blooded as any crime boss out there. Under his leadership, the family rose to insane levels of power, becoming one of the most feared organized crime groups in America.
Carlo Gambino had the intelligence of a fox, the strength of a lion, and the nose of a hawk.
This guy was calling the shots, and those shots ended in murder.
During those years, the mob was under the microscope, especially after those big Senate hearings on organized crime, when the 5 major New York families were really put on blast for the world to see. And that's when their names, Gambino, Genovese, Bonanno, Colombo, and Lucchese got burned into the public's memory. When Carlo Gambino passed, it was from a heart condition he'd been battling for years. There wasn't any suspicion of foul play. Kind of surprising, honestly, considering how messy and violent things usually got in mob circles. But what came after him? That's where it got wild. His brother-in-law, Paul Castellano, took over in 1976, and by then, the Gambino family wasn't just big, it was massive. Easily one of the most powerful and dangerous crime organizations in the US, but Castellano didn't get to enjoy the throne for too long. In 1985, he was gunned down outside Sparks Steakhouse in Midtown Manhattan, broad daylight. That hit wasn't random either. It was part of a calculated power move, allegedly ordered by none other than John Gotti. Now John Gotti, he flipped the whole script. Unlike the low-profile bosses before him who preferred to move in silence, Gotti loved the spotlight. The media nicknamed him the Dapper Don because he was always dripped out in sharp suits, silk ties, and expensive everything. Dude had style, and he wasn't shy about flashing it. But Gotti wasn't just about looking good. He had a brutal streak a mile wide. His temper was legendary. And if he even thought you were a snitch or stepping out of line, you were as good as gone. The press also called him the Teflon Don, because for years, no charges seemed to stick. He walked away clean from 3 major trials in just 5 years.
Gotti was ambitious, powerful, and ruthless. He ruled with flash and conspicuous style, playing celebrity with the media and cat and mouse with the FBI. They called John Gotti the Teflon Don.
But that kind of fame, that level of cockiness, it caught up to him. What finally brought Gotti down was betrayal from within. His own underboss, Salvatore Sammy the Bull Gravano, flipped and testified against him. Gravano laid it all out in court, the murder of Castellano, and the whole dirty playbook. And that was it for Gotti. The Teflon finally wore off. He got hit with a life sentence. After he got locked up, the Fed said he passed the torch, at least for a while, to his eldest son, John A. Gotti. But that didn't last too long. In '99, the younger Gotti ended up in prison after pleading guilty to extortion. Later on, John A. claimed he stepped away from the mob life completely around that time. But investigators weren't so quick to buy it. They believed that even from behind bars, the elder Gotti was still pulling the strings, using his older brother Peter as his right-hand man up until Gotti's death in 2002. After that, Peter Gotti supposedly took over as the official boss of the Gambino family. But like clockwork, Peter ended up in federal prison himself in 2004. His charges? A laundry list that included racketeering, money laundering, extortion, and even plotting to have Sammy the Bull Gravano killed. With Peter behind bars, it seemed like the Gotti grip on the family's day-to-day operations was finally broken. And for a while, the Gambino family leaders kept things low-key. But that didn't mean the feds weren't watching. In 2008, the Gambinos were back in the news in a major way when 62 people tied to the family got swept up in a massive federal racketeering bust. At that point, prosecutors said John Jackie D'Amico was acting boss, but after him came Domenico Tefelu, who quietly ran the show until Frank Cali took the reins. Then came Cali's shocking murder in 2019, and just like that, nobody really knew who was calling the shots. And sure, the Gambino Gambino family's power today isn't what it was during the peak Gotti era. The days of mob bosses strutting around New York like kings might be over. But make no mistake, there's still real danger lurking beneath the surface. In fact, fast forward to 2023, and the feds dropped the hammer on 10 alleged Gambino members who were trying to muscle their way into New York's garbage hauling and demolition game. But this wasn't just some business takeover, they were allegedly using brutal tactics straight out of a mob movie. We're talking about beatdowns so bad that one worker ended up in the hospital after getting attacked with a hammer. And one business owner, they allegedly threatened to slice him clean in half with a knife.
10 members of the Gambino crime family arrested
today. Yes,
Yeah.
Remember, we're talking about an employee at a firm that refused to give up money for tribute, getting hit with a hammer repeatedly until they were sent to the hospital. That a CEO of a carting company allegedly had a fire put on the front porch of their residence.
That indictment was no joke. These guys were hit with charges like racketeering conspiracy, extortion, arson, witness retaliation, fraud, and embezzlement. If convicted, they were looking at anywhere from 20 years to over a century behind bars. So when you think about it like that, it's pretty clear that Wu-Tang made the smart call back in the day. Imagine if they'd ignored that warning and kept the Wu-Gambinos title. That could have easily ended in a situation way bigger and bloodier, especially during that era when the mob still had a firm grip on parts of New York. Now Wu-Tang might have had to show respect and back off when it came to the Gambinos, but in the rap game, in their own world, nobody was checking Wu-Tang. And if you want a prime example of that, just look at the tension that sparked between Wu-Tang and Biggie Smalls. That whole situation really showed how Wu wasn't playing with anybody, not even Brooklyn's crowned king. To really get the full picture, you gotta rewind the tape to 1995. Hip-hop was in this magical golden era where legends were dropping classic albums left and right, but at the same time it was a powder keg. Everything mattered back then. Every line, every beat, every little detail down to what you put on your album cover. And if someone even looked like they were biting your style, that was basically throwing down the gauntlet. And during that time, biting was like the ultimate form of disrespect. So Raekwon comes out swinging with only built for Cuban links. But buried inside that album was a spark that lit a fire between two of the most powerful forces in the city. There's this skit where Ghostface Killah goes off the cuff and starts airing out rappers for jacking other people's ideas. He didn't drop any names, but everybody in hip-hop knew who he was talking about. The streets talk, the industry talks, and they all pointed at one man, the notorious Big C.
Biting off your album cover and yeah. Boom, bad enough they biting lines like killed me when they came with some knot bit off a nine.
C to Ghost and Ray. This wasn't some random complaint. They weren't just running their mouths in the booth. These guys were tight with Nas. They looked up to him. Nas's Illmatic cover, Little Nas with that Queensbridge backdrop, was iconic, sacred almost. So when they saw Biggie's Ready to Die cover with a baby sitting front and center, they didn't see a coincidence. They saw someone swagger jacking their man's style and cashing in on it. What Wu-Tang didn't know though, was that Biggie and Nas weren't enemies. Behind all the tension, they actually had mutual respect. They were cool. But in '95, when hip-hop was hypercharged and egos were sky high, perception was everything. And from Wu's view, Biggie had crossed a line.
We had a certain respect for Nas. Like I said, when Ghost said what he said, it wasn't nothing premeditated. All competitive, whether we like you or not. It's just competition. If it goes somewhere, then that's something else. But it was always about the sport.
And Big, he caught wind of the smoke real quick. Word travels fast in New York, especially when it's drama between two of the city's heavyweights. Biggie could have easily fanned the flames. He even went into the studio and laid down a diss track. He got all that frustration out on wax, bar for bar. But here's where Biggie showed his wisdom. He listened back, thought about what could happen if he let that record fly, and told his manager Jacob York to scrap the whole thing, delete it, let it go. As Jacob later told it on the Bossa Presents Don't Be Scared podcast, Biggie never put out a diss record against him. He rapped it, got it off his chest, then told me to erase it. And that probably stopped the city from going up in flames. But that didn't mean Big was just gonna roll over. He decided to play it cool but sharp. Instead of coming direct, he laced his response in subliminals, those clever shots that kept folks guessing. On Kick in the Door, he rapped, "This goes out for those that choose to use in disrespectful views on the King of NY." The message was loud and clear without ever saying a name. Big was letting everyone know he heard the chatter, and he wasn't the one to be disrespected. And what made the situation even trickier? Biggie and Method Man already had a connection. Meth was the only Wu member who appeared on Biggie's Ready to Die. That was huge at the time, a rare bridge between two powerful camps. But in the aftermath of Ghost's shots, that connection added tension. Some folks in Wu-Tang weren't exactly thrilled that Meth had worked with Biggie. Loyalty ran deep, and crew ties always came first. Meth and Big still respected each other, but the vibe in the air was thick with suspicion. Then came the night where everything could have exploded, the night that could have gone down as one of the darkest moments in hip-hop history. The scene was set, and if you were writing a script for disaster, this would have been it. A packed Manhattan nightclub on the West Side. The kind of place where tensions mixed with alcohol and egos could spark off with just one wrong look. Enter Peter Pistol, a dude who was a certified street legend. And with him was D-Rock, Biggie's right-hand man. The bond between Pete and D-Rock wasn't just about the streets, it was about loyalty earned the hard way. They'd done time together, they'd survived together. So when D-Rock came up to Pete that night moving with purpose, face tight with concern, Pete didn't need a whole explanation. He didn't need the details. The look in D-Rock's eyes said it all. Yo, Wu-Tang's trying to press big. We might have a situation.
He's my man. So D-Rock came to me, he was like, yo, what's up, Pistol? What up? Yo, what up, D? And he said, yo, so he was, like, yo, these guys trying to front on Biggie and shit like that, man. Like I might need you to, help us out, hold me down.
And Pete didn't hesitate. He and his people got ready. Not in a reckless way, but in that quiet, controlled way that real ones move. This wasn't about showing off or making a scene. It was about being ready to protect Biggie at all costs if it came down to that. Because everyone knew, Wu-Tang wasn't rolling deep with just rappers. Their crew was filled with street dudes, real hitters. If things jumped off, it wasn't gonna be a little scuffle. It would have turned that club into a war zone. So now, on one side of the club, you've got Biggie and his people, standing their ground. And across the room, Wu-Tang and their squad were holding position, watching, waiting. And for what felt like forever, the whole place froze. Like everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see who would make the first move. But here's where the story takes that left turn that saved the night. Pete didn't let pride or ego take over. He saw Raekwon across the way and decided to do what a real boss does. He stepped up to talk. And Raekwon heard him. Because Ray wasn't trying to bring heat down on the whole spot either. They both knew what could happen if they let their crews loose, and neither wanted that blood on their hands. And that was it. Cooler heads prevailed. The situation that could have turned into one of hip-hop's ugliest moments got diffused because two real ones chose peace over pointless beef. Pete's spoken about that night over the years, and he always keeps it real. He never tries to spin it like he or Biggie punked Wu-Tang. That wasn't the case at all. In fact, Pete's always shown mad respect for Raekwon, Ghost, Meth, the whole Wu camp, because at the end of the day they were all cut from the same cloth, street dudes who understood what was at stake.